To hear Crucy tell it, the Gavani had gotten licked so badly that they were packing up and going home, right after they all lined up and swore eternal peace to the people of Buttonhole Vale. While hope was a much-needed commodity around the castle, what he was doing went beyond good leadership. It was a blatant disregard of the reality. There are limits to fate, and he shamelessly crossed them and never looked over his shoulder. Now, I admit, I was still irate over his very public blame of me for the breach, and after hearing how his ancestors conquered the province, I was even less inclined to be deferent to him. But by claiming that salvation was at hand, when it was clearly not, was almost criminal. It was certainly irrational. Even Sir Kay, his trusted castellan, looked concerned, though he refused to speak an ill word against his liege. Sir Ronsil had no such qualms. He quietly came to me with a pair of his chivalrous brethren and asked about my plans for escaping the situation. But Crucy, he thought the day all but won. Perhaps it was my commoner's upbringing, but while I had always been taught to be respectful and slightly in awe of the nobility, I was coming to realize that the relationship worked in both directions. When a leader you are sworn to respect and obey comes out and simply lies about things you know are untrue, and does it to your face, it is a fundamental betrayal of trust that destroys the peasant-warrior relationship. Huin the tiller and Duin the destroyer are brothers in the pantheon. Duin is only elevated as a god of the nobility because he supposedly destroys only to protect or conquer. He does not seek to mislead his own people. Similarly, when the folk of the Riverlands are faced with a dishonest, corrupt, or even openly arrogant lord, there is a long tradition of the peasantry rising in arms. That happens much less often in the Wilderlands, due to the different social structure. Villeins and serfs are rare. Most of the Wilderland peasants are freemen, and the sparser population. To my knowledge, Buttonhole Vale had never enjoyed a peasant uprising before, but every time Crucy crowed about our impending victory, in defiance of the observable truth, I was becoming more tempted to lead one. I had more important duties that morning. After resting and healing for a dozen all too brief hours, I had the responsibility for distributing the captured Arians to the war magi who had risked life and limb to get it. More importantly, I had to instruct them of their use. I'd begun to notice a strange feeling that had developed when using my spear. A feeling as if reality itself was a little warped around me. Of course, I worried about Gavani magic and the influence of the Great Ghost, or whatever he liked to be called. I had already taken the precaution of associating the two pieces of Arianite the Penny's troops had captured with my spear, to shield it from Gavani influences. But I was starting to think that the effect was a product of just using the stone itself. I consulted with Zagor about this when he felt up to the conversation. He was still recovering from the siege at Brandner and the difficult journey south. Seeing so many of his friends perish had been hard on him. But he was an invaluable research tool, as he was the only human being I knew about who had grown up in close proximity to it and had mastered its control. I hated to put the man to use like that, after what he had been through, but I really didn't have a choice. The problem with Zagor was he either knew a tree folk term for something, which wasn't particularly helpful, or he would just shrug, because he didn't have the vocabulary to describe what he knew. That being said, he was helpful in advising us on the basic attunement and use of the witchstones. He did agree that there was a special feeling that built up when you used the stones overmuch, something to be avoided. It was one reason why he was stingy with its power, to avoid the addictive properties of Arianite. He watched me pass out the stones with a certain wry amusement, and enjoyed the reaction of the Magi as if they were children getting toys at will. The 19 war Magi, plus our homespun magical corps, had assembled on the roof of the tower in a neat semicircle around me, everyone within earshot, as I passed out the magical bounty. There weren't enough for everyone, of course. Beyond the stones held by Tyndall, Garkescu, and Rondal, there were 9 stones to go around, and 19 war Magi, plus pennies to wield them. I took a moment to inspect the eager wizards as I distributed the stones. Several I knew from Faris, or working as a war mage myself. Some I was just meeting. Professional war magi are an odd lot. When you can make a good living as a trained mage pretty much anywhere in the Five Countries, it takes a special kind of person to voluntarily give that up for the hard, violent, but lucrative lifestyle of the professional warman. I guess war magi come in two sorts. Those who get off on the pure adrenaline rush you get from charging an enemy line, and those who lusted after the powerful forces involved in war magic. Stuff the average spellmonger or court wizard just doesn't use in daily practice. War magi also differ from non-magical forces in that they have style. That is, they tend to go out of their way to make themselves individually distinctive in dress, mannerisms, and behavior, in order to increase their reputation, which in turn leads to more contacts. For example, Gargi was gaudy, even for a spellmonger. Most of these mercenaries had adopted garb that was sleek or deadly looking, high-grade leather, ornamented armor, dashing accessories of polished steel and such. In general, they're good dressers and adopt an arrogant attitude when they work. I suppose it stems from their unshakable belief that they are superior to any other soldiers in all respects. Egotistical bastards. I was grateful for their reward. The 17 men and 2 women assembled before wore a variety of robes and arms, ranging from the menacingly stark to the outrageously ornate. Various personal liveries and family mascots were emblazoned on some. Others focused more on clothes and accessories that made them seem more dangerous to the untrained eye. A few, as I said, I recognized. Azar, a slim, tall young man dressed in tight-fitting black leather over loose black Parisian silks, had patrolled the occupied city of Paris with me only a few years ago. He was a deadly fighter, I knew from personal experience. The kind who doesn't see enemies, he sees obstacles to be overcome. There was Quenny, a tall, mean-looking little man with a tendency toward courtliness and a penchant for plaid wools. I'd played dice with him a few times while we waited for work down in Buttonhole, and despite his scowling, gruff manner, he was a pretty decent guy. His specialty was nasty offensive magics, the sort that make you start bleeding from every pore, or turn the air in your lungs solid. He'd been in the thick of the Battle of the Tower, in another squad, and counted himself lucky to be alive. I was very pleased to see Tessia, a girlfriend of Penny's who had a spectacular knack for disabling defensive spells, particularly the kind that strengthened fortifications. She was also adept at magically augmenting siege engines. Indeed, she loved the engines. She was standing up front, swathed in a flowing red robe chased with golden griffins. Then there was Porta, whom the jongleurs of Castabriel had said is a grandson of Duin the Destroyer on his mother's side. Warring kind, a one-mage army invincible to any foe. I know this for a fact, because I was with him when he paid the jongleurs of Castabriel to say it. He had a nondescript peasant's face, and a quiver on his back that held a variety of wands. His mage blade was a foot longer than mine, and he had strapped daggers to every limb. Penny had mentioned that he had been plying his trade as an assassin and saboteur the last year or so in the Eastern Duchies, adding a little dark spice to the various inheritance feuds that were the main entertainment there, some of which dated back to imperial times. Off the field, he was a good, if somber, companion. On the field, he nearly lived up to his inflated reputation. Telemann, of course, I knew from the long march down the Parisian peninsula. I even bunked with him for a brief stint during the occupation. He's a good mage, good war captain, good friend, with absolutely no fashion sense. He wore a pale yellow cloak and tight-fitting blue leather pants under a shimmering hauberk of the finest mail I'd ever seen, heavily enchanted, and he wielded a powerful battle staff that dabbled as a spear. He had a jawline like a mountain, and he was an adept soldier and decent captain, and he loved his work. Telemann was the type of mage who got into war magic because he liked the powerful spells. His idea of a good time is watching stone battlements crumble to dust under a powerful aging spell. He's also one of the few war magi I knew who took an academic interest in war magic. He was writing a book on the subject, he bragged. Navone was another war mage with whom I'd worked, both in Paris and in a few freelance assignments. He was a genteel Gilmoran man, one could say that about most Gilmorans, for whom dueling is as much a recreation as a heritage. The others were a mystery to me, though I knew a few of them by reputation alone. But they were an impressive-looking lot, even to my eye. What impressed me more was that Penny had been able to get such a large, deadly group of individuals to come to my rescue on such short notice. They didn't come into this hopeless siege out of a sense of duty, compassion, or obligation. They wanted to get paid in Aria, of course. That was the only reason they were there. When the word had gone out from Penny, who has a habit of exaggerating just enough to motivate someone to do what she wants, the war magi who heard it had lined up from all over the duchy. In one case, the magical corps on both sides of a lagging territorial dispute in Castellon had simply quit, refunded their employers' fees, and made for the rendezvous point together. That brought me 4 war magi: Aria, Cormor, Carmela, a specialist in castle construction and repair, and the only other female war mage of the group, and Rollo. Enough stories about the mad mage's defense of Paris had circulated to inflame the whole twisted little war mage community. Masters, I began politely, and ladies. My name is Minolan, and until 2 months ago I was the spellmonger for a little village not far from here. Before you start making jokes about smelling horseshit when I'm around, let me add that I am also a graduate of the War College and the Arian Academy. I put in my time in Paris, and for the last several weeks I have been responsible for keeping that horde out there at bay. So, if you feel I'm a complete idiot, please keep it to yourself, because I might just blast you where you stand as a pure malicious spite. That earned me a chorus of chuckles and several appreciative nods. You can't earn the trust of a war mage by being obsequious, but crediting them with common sense works. They were warming up to me. It doesn't take a military genius to see what the situation here is. I appreciate your efforts on our behalf so far, and hope that you find the proposed compensation adequate. That brought more giggles. I remind you that by accepting these stones from me, you are technically in violation of the royal censorate's bans on magic, and may be subject to professional and civil penalties. I'll also mention that there is a dearth of actual censors in the Wilderlands, so your chances of being tracked down here are negligible, and any censor would have to fight his way through that lot before he could attempt to question it. Now, I said, taking the big leather pouch with the unclaimed stones from Tyndall, who stood by. There are not currently enough of these to go around, so we will have to share, at least until we can increase the supply. There were grumbles in the ranks, and a few sour faces. The good news is that there are more on the way. The bad news is that you will have to hack your way through 1,000 Gavani and duel an enthusiastically patriotic Gavani shaman to get there. More dry chuckles. Now, before we begin, I said, withdrawing the first stone from the band, some ground rules. I have no doubt that you all are far, far better war magi than I am. I am not here to debate them. I am here to tell you that, to my knowledge, I am the greatest living human academic authority on the subject of Arianite since the recent death of Oral Fett, and that I have had the most experience and instruction with the stuff, and you should listen to me for your own safety and benefit. Zagor over there actually has possessed the stone since childhood, and has received instruction in its use from the Alka Alon. That's impressed them. Any mage who had studied with the Alka Alon, even briefly, tended to be held in esteem by magic. While he has the experience to use it, I continued, he isn't classically trained, and may find it difficult to speak on the subject in terms we could understand. Nor is he a war